Okay. So obviously, and first I'll explain a little bit what is PWA. So it stands for Progressive Web Apps. Okay. And then it's using the modern web API. So that means, and the different APIs that you can use that come with your browser. And so we actually haven't quite used much at all. And so for the view itself, and it's not a web API, it's an external library you have to use. And obviously you use JavaScript, which runs in the browser, but it's not a particular API. But say the more, I can't remember, and maybe used, for example, in the second year, you would have geolocation API, and which is API allows you to get position of the user and browsing your website. So that's one example of these web APIs. And then for this PWA, we're going to use a very specific one called the service worker, which we'll cover later. So, and that's one part. And the other part is about the P in the name, the progressive. And so that basically means to support all the browsers, and for example, IE 9, Internet Explorer 9, and which it does not support all the features. And to some extent, and this becomes a less issue because now even Microsoft has moved on with their browser. So the latest Edge browser is quite up to date. So it will support most of these modern APIs. And so there's less concern there, but still the PWA or the progressive web apps allows you to support older browser as well. And so what this lead you to is a cross-platform apps. And so here cross-platform, not only just say in terms of how do I say, and Windows or Mac or Linux, but it also says mobile devices as well, for example, and Android, iOS devices or on tablets. Okay, so yeah, and so these apps supposed to work everywhere, and it would work on desktop, tablet, and phone. I mean, to some extent, we already achieved that. For example, the apps we have been built so far using Vue, and it runs in the browser. So any platform which has a browser, you can run it. So it's definitely can run on desktop, whether it's Windows, Mac, or Linux, so long as it has a browser, it would work. And on the tablet and phones, you can also run it in the browser. And obviously, you need to improve the design of your interface, and which is mostly about the CSS, so it works on these smaller devices. And otherwise, it still works. And then the PWA is to make it work even better on the tablet and the phone. So make them behave a little bit closer to the native apps. Okay, and so that's the next point. And so on the tablet and the phone, it gives you user experience. It's almost the same as native apps. And there's still some difference. And sometimes this is an advantage. Some people might think it's a disadvantage, but they are quite close now. Okay, and as progressive web apps, and it has the features both, so it's both a web app and to some extent and very similar to a native mobile apps. And so as a web app, and it's easy and fast to visit and then install the app. So what this means is you can just Google, and it might find your app, and you can click on the link and it will open the web app in your browser. And so you don't need to say go to the Google Play or App Store and to search and then install. And also the apps in the App Store or Google Play, those are the ones, if you do a search, usually you will not find them. So that's a disadvantage of being a native app. So also, and because And for the web app, you only just need the URL. So you can just share the web apps via link. And for example, you should have your front end now available on the GitHub pages. So if you want anyone else to use your app, you just need to give them the URL for your GitHub pages, and then they can start using the app. So that saves lots of work in terms of and putting the app into Google Play or App Store, which, I mean, especially App Store, is a quite difficult process. Okay, so one of the main difference between a native app and a web app is, for the native app, you can install it on your phone or tablet, and PWA can do that as well. And it's not something you can do as a web app, and you can't really install it. So you have to go to the same URL next time if you want to use it. But with PWA, you can actually install it locally. And this would add a icon to your home screen. And just as most app does, you do have an icon, you can click and open it. So you don't have to open the browser and type in the URL every time. And also works offline. Again, so that is something doesn't work for web apps. And then for the native apps, and it would work to a certain extent. So for the for some of the apps which does not require internet connection, or part of the function does not require internet connection, then you can run it locally, and even without the internet connection, and which will be the same for the PWA. For example, like a Google Maps, and usually even it's a native app, usually you need internet connection to work. But for example, you could save some of the maps locally, then even without the internet connection, and you can still work. It can still work, and that's a similar thing. We'll see that later on in the PWA as well. Okay, and these are some other kind of advantages by using PWA, as we already said, and it's something essentially like for search engines like a Google. These are just websites, and the search engine can't really tell exactly whether it's a web app or it's a PWA or it's just a website, and they treat it more or less equally. And as a result, it's discoverable. People can do a search. For example, they can just search, say, pet store or pet products, and your PWA URL might just show up in the search results. Okay, and so we talked about this a little bit. Say these apps are progressive, so even they are using these modern web APIs, and which essentially means the API is only supported in the more recent version of the web browsers, and it can still run in the older browsers. So maybe some of the features were not working or not working fully, but at least the app itself will still run with all the basic functions. Okay, and it's possible to make the app responsive in the sense, and you can use on different display sizes or display size of these screens, and from phone and tablets, laptop to TVs. So it will be much larger. So most of the apps are usually designed for laptops, and then it does not really working well with TVs or the smaller screens. So as I mentioned already, and this is something to do with the CSS, and then nothing to do with JavaScript. And essentially, you need to make your web design or the layout of your page responsive by using media query. And so we'll not be able to cover this. And in this module, it's a little bit beyond. We don't cover anything actually related to CSS. But just in general, you have a kind of several layouts, and you have rules to say, okay, if this is on the mobile device, I'll use this layout. If it's on tablet, I'll use a different layout. And the default one, the one we use, will be used on laptop, and so on and so forth. Okay, and finally, and it's quite safe, and actually, and the PWA requires you to use something called HTTPS, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but HTTP without the S is the usual one we use most of the time. The S is the more secure version of the HTTP, and it encrypts the data between the client and server. So when say the browser sends a request to your backend, and by default, sorry, not by default. So if they use HTTP, and so the actual message is the request itself is in plain text, so anybody can see. Whereas if you use HTTPS, and other people cannot see what the message is like, even they manage to capture the data. And okay, and we're going to see some examples. So these are the kind of quite popular apps, which is the PWA, and you can actually install on your phone. And so the first one is Twitter Lite. I think this is the lighter version of the actual Twitter app. So the Twitter would have its native apps for the Android and iOS devices. And so what you do is you go to the Twitter Lite website, which here says mobile.twitter.com. And again, so this is on the Android device, and on iOS will be slightly different. And you have this button, which says add a Twitter to home screen. So basically that means the browser detect, and this is the PWA and prompt, and then you can install it. So give you this option here, and then you can choose so yes or no, because you don't always want to install it as app. So there's always a choice. And if you click add here, and then on your home screen, you should have a Twitter icon there. So it looks almost like a normal app or native, something you installed from the Google Play. And next time, if you want to run the app, you just need to click this and Twitter, an icon, and it would open up the app itself. Okay, and it also works for pin interest. Again, very similar processes. If you open up the website in the browser on your mobile phone, you would have this prompt and say add pins to your home screen, and you can choose add, and then you would get an icon on your home screen. So actually, and this option, and it also actually works on computer as well, or tablet. So tablet and phone are similar, but on the computer like Windows or Mac PC, and if it's a PWA, the browser also would give you a prompt to say, so you have the option to install, and if you click yes, and you would have icon added to your desktop, and which I'll show later on, if we get that part today. Okay, and also, and this is a Starbucks. Again, very similar process. And you open the URL in your browser, you click the button, and then confirm, and you would get icons on your home screen. Okay, and as I think I already mentioned it before, and this is actually an Android device, and which usually has better support for PWA, and the interface or how these things look like will be slightly different on the iOS device, and because in general Apple doesn't really like PWA, and they want people to put all the apps in their app store so they can have full control. Whereas because if you have your app as a PWA and user does not have to go through App Store to install them, so they do not have control, which they don't really like. So the support and on the Apple device is not as good on the Android device. And also, I think we will not be able to cover in this module, but for example, on the Android device, and you can actually turn the PWA into something which you can put into Google Play, And so you can turn a PWA into a native app, and by just doing some steps, you don't have to rewrite the code. Whereas that is not supported on the Apple device, iOS device, that's not possible. Okay, so here are some of the examples. So what we will continue to do, and we're going to continue, and the examples we made before. And so this is the pet store example. We kind of stopped at the end of the first part when we discovered the view, and then we developed the front end of online store. We use the pet store. And so we're going to continue using that example. And now we're going to try to turn that into a PWA. And so if you remember, this is roughly what it looks like. You have some titles, a button here, which allows you to switch between the product list and the checkout page. And you have some list of different products. I'm only showing 2 here, and you probably have more. For each product, you have a title, pictures, some information. These are all done using View. And also you have these buttons, which allows you to add the product to the shopping cart. Yeah. And so for the coursework one, it was purely done as a web app. Now we try to, in this lecture, we start trying to turn into a PWA. Okay. So yeah, in terms of loading the data, and previously we loading the data and from a local file, which is in a JS file, and instead of say loading the data from the MongoDB on the server. And for the demonstration of this part, and we probably would still using say a local file or something because it's just easier. And this does not affect how you turn a PWA how do you turn a web app into a PWA? You could just work on the result or the things you build for the second coursework, which already say using the fetch request to get the lesson information from your server on the Heroku, and actually then get the data from there. And you can use that as well. And that part, the fetch part, should not be affected by using PWA. Okay, and so we're going to try to turn that into a PWA, so you can actually install it locally, and it would add a shortcut to your home screen, and it would work offline. And so that means the required files will be stored locally on the device, and for example, your laptop or on the phone. And so even when there's no internet connection, it will still work. But this here, it will not work fully. And for example, if you don't have the internet connection, you should still be able to display the list of products and the pictures and information. But you will not be able to actually, for example, submit an order, because that needs to be saved on the server. It's not something you can do just locally. So that's the same even for a native app. And for online shopping app, if you don't connect to internet connection, you don't have internet connection, you can't actually buy anything. Maybe you can see what is available, but you can't really buy. So this work offline is to a certain extent that's possible and without network connection. Okay, and as we already said, these things, these features, are working not just on the phones, but also working on computers as well. And so you can install locally on the computer, your laptop, and it will add a shortcut to your home screen. And even your laptop don't have internet connection, still works. Some of the features that's possible, and the works offline will still work. Okay, so first, we just need to do a quick look of or maybe quick review of the code we had before in terms of creating this front end using the view, basically, and just this app we did before. Okay, and so it needs a main HTML file, which will load all the code and other libraries needed. So you will need this line, which this line here, which loads the view library. Otherwise, you can't use anything which would set the view. And this is the line which loads the product information. So that tells you the titles, the price, availability of the product. Okay, and I probably have the actual file I can show as well. Okay, let me open up the Visual Studio Code to look at the actual code. Okay, I think this is the one we can use. Live preview. Okay, it doesn't work properly here. Oh, so that's not working either. Let's see what the problem is. View is not a constructor. Oh,
Is it because you do apps instead of web store?
sorry?
You do apps instead of web store.
Which line of code? Can you see the line number of the code?
Yeah, 105.
Line 5, this line.
Line 11. Change that
11.
app store, yeah.
What do you mean, App Store?
Yeah,
You mean this called App Store?
yeah. The web app.
So this is just ID, which is like a name you give it to an element. You can call it any name. Just make sure the one matches what in the view code. So here I say app, and here I say app. That's fine. I suspect this to do actually view.
I would say you're using view tree, I think. So it doesn't work.
I think that's maybe something, yeah. Let's do this and view 2, yeah. Let me just try using a different version. ESM. Or this one. Okay, let's try this version. With this one. So still, this. Okay, yeah. Nah, it's all working fine now. Okay, and so yeah, so obviously the old link now is broken, and the unpkg one is no longer working, so we have to use this longer one URL, which is on the official NV website, so hopefully it will last a little bit longer.
Would you mind posting that in the chat? Would you mind copying that in the chat?
Oh, okay. But I mean, also you can just Google and Vue2 CDN. And so obviously Vue is what we are using. Vue2 means version 2. And CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. Essentially just means the online servers which host these library files and some other content. And they would define these things. Okay, yeah, let's get back to the library itself, and sorry, the code. And so we need now this line, which loads the Vue library we need, and this line loads the product information in a JS file. And if you're using your Node or Express server, then you don't need this. But we can see here, this is the actual file. So that's the products.js. We have something called the products, have the list of array of these products with some information about each one of these. Okay, yeah, so I also add this line here, and which is about using the font awesome and just get some icons. So this is optional. If you don't want to use any icons, you don't need this. Okay, and let's go back to the slides. This one? No, that's the actual app. Yeah, and so that's the head section. And so this one no longer works. I have to get it replaced to something else. Okay, and that's the list of products. And in the products.js file, we had a look as well. That's this one here, and it's a list of the different things. Okay, and then the actual app itself about Vue. So new Vue is creating a new instance. And so the Vue itself is like a class. And this one creates an instance and all these things. And inside the curly bracket is like you run the function past the parameter. And that's it. That's one parameter, which itself is a JSON object, has lots of things, which essentially are all the Vue code. And also, and this part can be useful and is to give a name to your Vue instance, so you can reference this later, actually either even inside the Vue itself. But also, this also allows you to reference to the app inside, for example, the console. Let me say, if I switch to this one here, I can inspect and go to my console. Let me see what I think. Let me just check what is called in my code. My Vue instance is called, okay, web store. And here I can type in web store, and it actually would recognize this is the view instance, and you can see all the details of this. But some of these actually we added, for example, add to cart is a function and all these things. And you can actually reference to the different data you defined in here. Let me see if we defined anything. So we define something called a site name. We also have products. And then here I can type in web store. Don't maybe have to type here. Web store dot site name, and you can see it can recognize this, or say web store dot products, and they will give you the array of all these things. And that's, yeah, these actually the other default things created by these are the properties given. So yeah, and obviously, and most of these things you can access from the view extension as well, which I didn't enable. View develop tools. I might have to rerun the page. Oh, I still didn't have it. Well, so that would have the view here now. Still don't. Yeah, view is detected. Okay. It does say open DevTools and look for the view panel, which I don't see it.
Reopen it again.
I could. Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah. So yeah, you would see most of the properties in here as well. Go here, and you can see these defined things. But also, if you have a name, you can see these things inside the console as well. Okay, back to the code. Yeah. So obviously you have to pointing to a particular elements, or which is called kind of, I forgot the words, mounting. Yeah, the mounting element on your page. And I said hashtag app, that means that goes to this element, which has an ID called app. So that has to map, has to match. And you have products, and this will link from the products, which is defined in the JS file. So you can see here we have something called products, and that will be this products here, and then becomes a variable inside a view variable called products. Cart is an array which will be empty. That's where we add everything to the cart. And we have some methods. These are the functions, essentially functions. And add to cart is a function, which is when user click on the page. So when they click this button, they will run this function, which was, if you remember, that should be in the code. And it will say button here. So it says v on click. We're going to add to cart, and then it's going to run the add to cart function. And then some computed property. And so computed property is something similar to data, but its value is dynamically computed as it changes, and the value will change. And in the case, we will use that to sort the products. Okay. And so that's, or maybe have, I can't remember. Don't remember if we have any other computed properties. Does this help? Don't need. Do you have method? Okay, it does. Oh, it has computed. Okay, and interface calculator, we didn't use any computed property. We have some, but somehow they are commented out. I don't remember why we did that. Okay. Okay, and then the actual view code, there's a view code inside the HTML part, and it's mostly v4, and which you go through the products and display them. And in our examples, and we didn't sort in this particular example, we didn't sort, we just go v4 and then go through the products, just everything in the products without particularly order. And all these you're probably familiar with. This is to display and the information, display the product information by using the data stored in the array. And this is how you reference to a particularly an attributes in the array. And we talked about a little bit about this as well. So you can use @click or v_on_click and to run particular functions. So that's what we need. And to record when people add something to the cart. And this is the part, and when actually you can check if there's no more stock, you should disable this button, and you can use VF to do this. And this is one of the computed properties. Okay, and let me just quickly check how I'm doing in terms of time. Okay, we are halfway through, so I think we are fine. Okay, and in this particular case, I added a little bit of formatting, and I don't know if I add that to this code in particular, which I didn't, I think. No, I didn't add any particular formatting, and which I could. And so, for example, if you add the formatting, you say do something like that, put a border around the products and make text in the middle, and so that gives you the border, and these are just margins. And these might be useful, for example, if you want to make it, this will make it look slightly nicer, maybe work slightly better on the smaller screen as well. And we could just do that. So the quickest way to do this, just put that in here. Okay, and so we're going to just define the class, and then okay, div if show progress full, and here we just say class equal to product. Did we call this one? Yeah, we'll call it product, and let's see. Where did it go? Ah, it didn't work. So I thought it should work. Okay, we'll define the style. That's the product. And then in the div class equal to, okay, I misspelled and product. So if I go here, the class should be called product. Okay, you can see now we have a box around each product, things are aligned in the center, which might not necessarily be any better, but at least add a little bit of space between the border as well. Okay, and that's completely optional, but that shows you how to do this. So what you need to do is just add this. First, you add the formatting rules, and this is by going to an external CSS file. But here, just for quick demonstration, I put inside the element style element in the head, and you just add class equal to products, which is this class, and to each of your product. Some of you already did that in the first course. Okay, and back here, so tidy up this one a little bit. Okay, now it actually goes on to the PWA part. And so the first thing you need is something called a Web Manifesto File. And it has a few fields you have to fill in. It's a configuration file. And to some extent, it's similar to the package.json file. It will have some fields, predefined fields, and has predefined values. You have to use it. And so it shouldn't be too difficult. So that's the first requirement. We're going to have a bit more and look at that into a bit more details later. And then the second one is, when you run or hosting the PWA, and it must have a HTTPS connection. And so I already explained. So usually we're just using, or we used to mostly using HTTP, which is old and which is non-secure in the sense the communication is not encrypted. And to make a PWA, and you have to have HTTPS. And so if you want to host your web server, host your service on your PWA on any server, you have to make sure it provides HTTPS. And I would say most of the hosting server should do now. And partly because, for example, Chrome will give you a warning to any website which does not have HTTPS. And in our case, we have been using GitHub Pages, and actually it provides HTTPS connection by default, and so this should not be a problem. Okay, and and so this is an additional requirement, and we need an icon. And so if you remember, you can install the file. You can install the PWA on a phone or on a computer. Then it will add a shortcut to your home screen, which needs an icon. And so usually this is the image file. So we need to provide one. So this is required. And finally, we need something called a service worker. And this is to make the app work offline. Okay, and so this is so essentially one of the key things this service worker does, and it will cache the files needed to run your app. For example, all the code files like the HTML, CSS, or the image files. And then the app would work, and even there's no internet connection, so at least it can display the list of products. Okay, so these are the 4 requirements you have to meet, and then your web app becomes a PWA. Yeah. So as you can see, and this actually to meet these requirements, you don't actually have to change any logic or how your apps looks. It mostly just about adding a few things. Add a image file, add a web manifest file, and this is about the settings on the server hosting app. And this one actually need to write a few lines of code. But again, this does not require changing any of the existing code. You don't have to change how you display your app, or how do you display your product, or how, for example, add to cart button works. It's just a few additional ones. And we'll see how to do that. And only the last part is probably the one which actually requires some coding. And so obviously these ones, mostly. So this is just image file. You need to find a picture, and this is creating a JSON file, which is not really programming. And this is about setting up the servers. In our case, it's already done. So only this part requires some coding, which we'll see, I think, in the rest of the later in this lecture. And so we're going to start with the first part, the Web Manifesto File. Okay, as we said, it's essentially a JSON object. And so it's usually in the root folder of the web app. And so, for example, in our case, if we are going to have a Web Manifest file, which we already did, and you put it under demo, which is where all the other main files are, for example, not under images. Yeah. Okay, and it contains information like the app's name. So you need to give a name to your app and pass to different size icons, and basically where to find the icons if you need to install it on the home screen. And you can actually have different sizes, so different resolutions. We have big and small icons. So the system can decide what was the best size to choose and choose from these different sizes. But you can also just give the one icon, and you always use that, which might not look the best if the resolution is not high enough. Okay, and I think this is something optional, and it says a background color to use when you're loading or splash screen. So this is just basically when you first start the app, and it will show a screen, and with some background color, you can set the colors of the background screen. That's all. Okay, and in terms of the extension, it should be called the Web Manifest, and .json also works. And I haven't tested it, but essentially it is a JSON file. But this name makes it more clear what exactly that is. Okay, and you need to link the files in the head section of the HTML file, something like this. So very similar to link to, say, the CSS file. But instead of, say, relationship in terms of style, you now say it's a manifest. And then you followed it by the actual manifesto file name. So this file name, you can choose web store or online shop, but the file extension should be called the Web Manifest, which is the one we said here. So this is one of the examples we said, and that sets the name for your PWA. You can also have a short name, which is pesto. Actually, and this is probably more important, I think, if you install it on your phone, for example, and this will be the name shown below the icon. You can add more detailed description of what the app is. This can be quite long. And then you said, these are my icons. And we said, as we mentioned before, you can have a list of icons of different resolutions. In this case, we only have one. It says the icon is inside the images subfolder, and the name is called icon512.png. So it means the size is 512 by 512, and that means 512 pixels by 512 pixels is square shaped, and usually the icon should be square. And then the type is PNG. So this is the part specifying the icon. Okay, and this is quite important, and it tells you how does the app start how to start your app. And so, for example, if you have multiple HTML files, and this tells it which HTML files to load, and maybe use some other files to start your app. And this display goes to full screen. And so that basically means show no borders or no address bars or these tabs. And for example, I can go full screen here. I couldn't. Why? I'm not allowed to go full screen. here. Okay, and something like this. And so you can see it's now does not show, say, URL or tab or any menu bars, and just only show what you have shown here. And essentially, and the PWA is still running. Oops. Oh, I have to do this. F and F. Yes. Okay. Would not allow me to. Okay, essentially, and PWA is still running in the browser, and but by going in full screen, and you don't see any of these things on top, and make it them basically looks more like a native app, because native apps don't have address bars or tabs or menus. And you can set background color. So this is the color, and as we talked about, the splash screen color here. So when you're loading, it will show us like a screen, maybe probably only with your icon, and this sets the color of that screen, the background color of that screen. Okay, and so we're going to go to the actual. Okay, let me just do it very quickly, time-wise. Okay, half an hour. And so that's the file. More or less just copied straight away. And from the examples in the lecture slides, and I guess difference, we now have two options. We have two sizes. One is 32, the other one is 512, and the name is actually slightly different, but other things is more or less the same. Okay, and then what we need to do is we need, in the actual file, we need to add a link, if you remember. So this is not a style sheet. This will be manifest. Just double check if I got the right file. Yeah, manifest. Okay, and so that means this is different type of files. This is web manifest file, and that's the actual file, which is already there. Okay, and once you start running this, come on. You actually should be able to see from the application tab. Okay, and so this is another tabs, and that can be quite useful. When you try to build the PWA, it's called application, and it has manifest, service worker, storage, and later on we're gonna using, say, the service worker and a bit more as well. But for this particular one, at least by now, because you created the web manifest file, if you click here, I should have something information show on this side. And maybe I'll just make this one full screen. And I'll put these things on the side. Okay, and you can see at least it recognizes we have a web manifest file called the petstore.webmanifest. Installability, it says no matching and service work detected. Okay, and that's because if you remember, we need to meet all these 4 requirements to make it installable. So currently we have this one and this one, but this part is still missing. So that's why in here it tells you installability that is missing. But otherwise you can see these are the properties which is recognized from the petstore web manifest file. Say the name, short name, description, this is something not standard, but also say the start URL, background color and display, all these things are picked up. And you can also see it recognized and the icons I provided. And so if we go here, if we look at this file, I provided these two files, and inside the image directory, so we go image, you can see that's the lower resolution one, and 32 pixels by 32 pixels, and that's the high resolution one, so 512 pixel by 512 pixel. And you can see here in the Chrome browser, and these different versions are recognized as well. Okay, so that means it's working fine. Otherwise, if any of those information you set in the web manifest file does not show up here, that means there's something not correct. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if you look at just the app itself, nothing would really change. So if you go here, look at this particular app itself, and it doesn't change. But you can see the web manifest information is there now. Okay, and we covered these already. So all these different properties. Okay. And also the error message here in terms of installability, we're still missing the service worker. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the service worker. Okay, and the service worker is kind of like a proxy between the browser and the network. And so this will be your view app, and this will be the internet. And usually the app talks to or connects to the internet directly. Excuse me. And for example, if the View app wants to download the View library file, for example, we're using particularly say this file here for View, or this file here for Font Awesome, it will go straight away to the network to get all those files. But now with the service worker, and all the requests would go through service work first before, for example, if you want to get this file, this View file, and it had the request will go through service worker first, and then go to the server to get the actual file. Okay, and then you might ask and say, why do I want to take these extra steps, which maybe slow me down and I have to write extra code? And so this is where the cache comes in. And so the cache is a local copy of the files. So it does not guarantee it has all the files you need, but sometimes it does. So what you can do is, so this thing is actually not stored in the internet. This thing is actually also and stays on your own computer. So actually the application, service worker, and the cache all lives in your browser. So all these three things are on your browser. And so, okay, back to why we need service worker. So for example, when the applications need this, for example, the View file, and the service worker would first check the cache. For example, if you already have that in the local cache, then you don't need to go to the server to download the file. You can just get the data or get the files from the cache directly and use it in your code, front-end code. So usually retrieving from cache is much faster because it's essentially in the same computer, or literally in the same browser as where the application is. And then it don't need to go to the network to get the file. But that also means even there's no internet connection, basically there's no connection here, the application can still work because it can get the files needed from the cache, which is stored locally. Don't need any connection to get to it. Okay, and the other good thing about this is all this part in terms of getting files from cache and is transparent to the application. So that means for the application part, you don't need to make any changes. You can just still use this line of code in your front-end web app. You don't have to say, okay, and go check the cache first. If there's a file, use the file from the cache. If it isn't, go to the internet and retrieve files. So for the front end, you don't need to make any changes. The service worker will take care of those. And it would automatically decide whether you get the files from the cache or the network, and then provide it to the application. Okay, and so this is something quite important to understand. And so the service worker itself, okay, and also the service worker is one of these modern web browser APIs we talked about. This is something new API. So all the browsers support it and service worker, so you can just use it. And it runs on a separate thread from the main JavaScript code. Okay, and so any JavaScript code in your HTML file would essentially run in the browser, and this runs on a separate thread. So essentially means, and the service worker is run in parallel to your front end, the view code. They would not interfere or interact with each other. Okay, but as a result, and they don't have access to any DOM element. For example, you can't say document.getElement by ID something in your service worker. That's possible, not possible, because it does not have access to the main window. Okay, and the benefit will be becomes of non-blocking, and because it's run separate from your main JavaScript code, and it might take lots of time to do something, and it will not affect your normal JavaScript code. For example, the user can still interact with your app, say add items to the shopping cart, etc., even when something is happening on the service worker thread. Okay, and this is another kind of common user case for the service worker. Yeah, and didn't really write down here. For example, if you need to do some very, I don't know, and heavy number crunching, and you can use a service worker to do that. It might take, I don't know, even like a few minutes to compute, and the service. So when the service worker is working on it, and your front-end JavaScript code will be still working, so you don't have the whole web app frozen waiting for the computation to finish. Okay, and also this is also important. That means the service worker, the results will be returned as a promise. Again, so that means almost like it's asynchronous and similar to how you talk to the Express server. So when you send a request, what you get back is a promise. It says, and you have some functions. That means when the actual results returned, those code will run, and same here. So you don't get any instant result from the service worker. You have to write code in the promise way. So basically dot them and wait until you actually get the results back, because it can take some time. Okay, and again, so for the service worker, and it also requires HTTPS, which is another reason you need HTTPS for PWA. And because PWA requires service worker, which requires HTTPS, so you need HTTPS for service worker. But in general, let's make the PWA more secure. Okay, and this is what you need to do. And in terms of register service worker, so first this line, just this part here, and it's just to test if service worker is supported by your browser. And we already mentioned service worker is one of these modern APIs, and it should be supported by most of browsers, even the one from Microsoft Windows. But I mean, it doesn't hurt just to do a check. So the service worker.in navigator. Navigator here is the browser itself, and this one would return empty if the browser does not support service worker. And then in that case, and this condition will be false, and then it will not run this line. Okay, and so if this is true, so there is such things called service worker supported by a browser, then you can register service worker. So you say that's your browser window dot service worker. You tested it actually exists dot register, and that's the name of the JavaScript file which you put your service worker code inside. So service worker is still JavaScript. It's just like using one of these APIs. For example, you use another one you probably use is say the local storage as the API, and you need to write some JavaScript code to use that API. Here we put that in a separate file, and that's usually the case because we mentioned, and it's run separately and from the JavaScript for the web page. So it's usually in a separate file, and you just need to tell it where to find that file. And the file names will differ, depends on what you call your service worker file. Okay. Yeah. And this one almost works just like a separate JavaScript file. So it just says you can't load like something like this. It doesn't work. Even if it's a JavaScript file, because it's service worker, you can't just say script source equal to something to load the file. It doesn't work. You have to use this to load. Okay. So as we said, and one of the main functions we use here for service worker is to cache all the files that's needed. So when the app is offline, you can still get those files, and then the app will still be running. Okay, so then you need to give the name of the cache, and then decide what are the files going to be stored in that cache. Okay, here we just define two variables, so I'm going to use that later on. And so the name of the cache, so how do I say, it's almost like a storage space, and the name is used to identify that storage space. Just as how you have a folder name, you have a Git repository, you have a repository name. So here is a cache. You can have many different caches, and this one has its own name called PetStore version 1, because this can be updated and we'll have later versions. Okay, and this one basically listed all the files you want to put in the cache. And usually these will be the list of the files that you needed to run the app. And so you obviously need the main index file, and the product information, the web manifest. You maybe have some CSS file as well, and some of the pictures, etc., etc. So these are the pictures for the pictures for the products. You might need the pictures for the icons for the PWA as well. So you just need to list all the files. Okay, and again, it's important in terms of the relative paths. And if you have don't have anything, that means these files should be in the same folder as the main file, or wherever the service worker is started. And then if there's in a subfolder or different directory, you have to go up and go down or something, and you have to include in the paths. Okay, so if we look at, in our case, so we have the main file, and this file, and maybe the web manifest file, these are in the same level as the service worker, so you don't have to include any paths. And for any of these pictures we want to include, and because it's in the subfolder, you have to say images slash followed by the image file name, which are these ones. Okay, as we mentioned before, so the service worker or the using of the caching files is transparent to the code, so that you don't have to change any front-end code. You can use it, and the service worker will check and decide whether to use the files in the cache. So you need to write some code to first caching the files. These means save a local copy of the files, which would be otherwise on a server, for example, on GitHub server, GitHub pages. Okay, and so what here, this line says, when the install events happened, so that means installing the service worker. When that event happened, so the E here means the event, means does not mean error, and you display a message, and you say wait until, and then here is actually caching the files. So this is like a predefined object, which including all the caches, and we only have one now, which is this one. So it will say open this cache. It says cache name, which is this name here, which you can decide. Okay, again, you can see it's a promise because it has .then it will return the actual cache object. So this is like the container itself, the cache container, which is empty, but it is a cache. And you can display a message, then you know, okay, you're getting to this part that's running, and you do cache.add all cache files. So this one is this one here, which is the result of open cache. Essentially, if it does not exist, it will create a new cache called store version 1. And it do add all, which is add the files you listed in here, which is called cache files, which is this one here. So whatever files you list in here, it will be added to the cache. Yeah? So this one will run when the service work itself is installed. And then you just run these code and it will cache all the files and you listed here. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, we kind of mentioned that already. So the cache, this here is an object which refers to all the, you can have multiple caches. And we want to open a particular one if it does not exist, and it will create it. And if it already existed, it will add more to the cache, basically adding on top what is already in there. Okay, and so once the file is added to cache, that basically means the files are now loaded locally. Okay, yeah, if you've done those, then it will, okay, so we need to kind of go back a little bit now. So first you need to add this to your, okay, so first you need to create your service.worker file, and which we already did. If I created the one already. Okay, and you can see we give a name, and I'll make a list of files I want to cache. Okay, and then we need register here. Let me see. Okay, so the way to add it is we need to run this line of code in the main file, and it can be run anywhere. So in this case, I'm gonna just run it in the head. I think it's if service worker in navigator okay, navigator dot service okay. So I didn't use the quotation here. Hopefully that would work. But as we explained, this one, this line in the main file with the register and the service worker. And this code will be run when the page is reload, and it will try to run the code inside the service worker.js. And so this is the one we just saw. It says when it's installed, it will try to open a cache with a name you define here, and then add everything you listed in here to the cache. Yeah. So if we go to this page and we refresh it, it should show the service worker now. Why it's not showing up? Oh, okay, so it looks like I might still have to use the quotation mark. Can't be. I was hoping yeah, service worker. Let's try again. No. Okay. So it'll be capital S. Sorry, and small case s. Let's try again. Yay. Okay. So again, it has to inside quotes and has to be small s because that's how the actual object is called. It's not start with capital. Okay, and you click here. Now you can see there's a service worker, and you can see it's recognized. So first, if you look here, and that error message saying installability, you need a service worker, that's gone. That means it's recognized service worker. Hey, come on. Okay, and here you can see all the information about the service worker. That's the file, the status is green, that means it's running. So that means once you, oh, these things are new. But also you can see in the cache storage, you have this cache called pet store demo, and the name would be the name we set in the code. Here in the service worker, we call the cache and pet store demo. That's why it's here. And you can see a list of files being cached. So these are the files saved locally inside the local. This is kind of like the local storage, but it's different part. So this is the local storage part. You might use it before. And you can see this one, these are the 4 files, which are the ones I listed here. Okay, so I didn't list everything. For example, I didn't include the pictures, but these files are now included here. You can actually see what it is if you click on it. Okay, so that means we already meet all the requirements of the PWA. Oh, sorry, back to the slides. Okay, and then these ones. Okay, yeah, I already showed you this part. And once you run, you should, under the service worker, you should see this information. That means it's run properly. And if it's not, it means something is not correct. You need to fix them. And you can also see the cache the files, which I already showed you. Okay, and so to use local files, and you need to add this. So basically, the service worker would check whenever there is a fetch request, it will to try to check if it's available from the local repository, and if it is, we'll try to retrieve it from there rather than to go into the internet and download. Okay, so you would say when it will listen to the fetch request, and you've done the couple in the front end for the second coursework, and just because of the time, I have to maybe rush a little bit. Here is just example code you need to use to get the files from the local fetch. So it will try to match, just basically check if the file exists in the local cache. If it is, it will return the files. Okay, and we already seen this part. Okay, and so even though we already cached a few files, as we can see here, we cached these 4 files, but that's not enough to run everything. So now if I lose internet connection, I just try to run the PWA locally without internet connection, it would look something like this. Okay, and first, the view is not running, and because we didn't cache actually the view file, and then we don't have the pictures because we did not cache all the pictures files, and so on and so forth. And so this is where we need to add more. Okay, so instead of listing all the files here, which you can do in here, but also maybe more convenient way is adding the missing files to the cache whenever it's being loaded from the internet. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go through these codes, but essentially what these does is, so whenever there is internet connection, and it will automatically add all the files that's not in the cache to the cache. So any files needed to start the app will be automatically added to the cache. Okay, rushing through here a little bit now. Okay, so once you add this code to your to your service worker, and you can actually see this is actually the combination of adding new files and returning existing files. So it will first check if it exists, you would return the files from the cache. Otherwise, you would run run actual fetch request, and then you open the cache and put the response in the cache. So basically, if it doesn't exist, it would add the files to the cache once it's downloaded or returned from the server. So what will happen is it will automatically add these additional files, which is not originally listed for example, the view files, if you use font or some files, it will be added to the server. Yeah. And then you can just test again, and this should work. And if you can always test it by just clicking this offline option, then you can test the service worker as if there's no internet connection, even when you are still there. So I'm gonna just show you very quickly here. Here, you can go to service worker. Now it's working fine. Oh. Did I stop? Oh, why it doesn't work anymore? Huh? It seems it stopped here. Live preview, stop server, live preview. Of course. Run file in external browser. It says this file can't be reached. Doesn't make any sense. Why? Okay, and I'm just not using the okay, I'm just open this from the file directory directly now. And promise. Yeah, okay. There's a few errors. Okay, and we are running out of time, so I'm gonna just have to skip these for now. I'm gonna just go to the last option is just says here, if you want to test, you can always use this offline one to simulate not having an internet connection. And then finally, and if you put all the code into GitHub repository and make it available on the GitHub pages, and that becomes a fully working PWA. And you can give the URL to anybody, and they can open the URL. Say, for example, this on my Android phone, it will actually prompt to say, make the pet store, and you can click install and then give it the icon. And you double click the icon, this will start up look like this. And this, the red is the background color we set. That's the splash screen, and that's the color we set before. And this is it. And also, as I said, I'll just show you very quickly. If I can get to the URL, and this installs on local computer as well. Yeah, let me see. Kai. Okay, so this is what I put on my GitHub pages. If I enter, and so it loads here, which is completely normal. And you have this icon here. I'm already installed. And this is what the run and install, yeah, something like this. Okay, and I will stop there now.